what would you say is kind of like the real leftism or the core of left-wing ideology? What does that mean to you?
Yeah. So, I mean, when people refer to like left, it's of course like a very broad term. It's kind of like a heuristic for a lot of different things. It can mean a lot of different things to different types of people. And so there is kind of like an actual, like more traditional definition of this that doesn't really fit very well with kind of like the colloquial way in which it's used, especially in countries in the US and a bit in Europe as well. It's, I feel like it's becoming a bit more Americanized over time. But usually when people refer to left, that usually means that, like in a traditional sense, it's a group of people who are critical of capitalism, that they would prefer that the type of political economic system that which we live in is not capitalism. Usually it's something like socialism. Usually something that is more democratic, or like a type of economy where things are more democratically run rather than run in the interest of capitalists or people who have a lot of capital, a lot of not necessarily money, but a lot of assets, a lot of private property. They own factories, they own land, they own all of the things that you need in order to like produce the things that are necessary for our existence in life. Like you have to pay money to these guys in order to purchase like the things that you need to live. And so that's a type of power dynamic. It's also a type of political economic system that we call capitalism. So people on the left are generally people who are critical of this, who think that we need to move away from that. Generally, I kind of think of left as well as like it's a pretty big spectrum with a lot of different kind of ideas in there. Like because it's the idea of wanting to move to something else, a lot of times the biggest disagreements within the left are how do we get to that something else, and what does that something else look like? There's like a bajillion different types of ideological strains of manifestos and different things that you can kind of go into the rabbit hole, but there are a couple that are like more popular or more have just like a richer tradition behind them. So that includes things like Marxism or things like anarchism, are like kind of like the two biggest branches of the left, I guess you could say. But then there's also, I think there's an argument to be had of people who are social democrats to be considered part of the left, or maybe the center left. And this would be some people who are who still believe in capitalism, but who believe in a capitalism that is heavily regulated and has a large welfare state behind it. I don't really agree with that position. I think that sort of capitalism itself is kind of contradictory and flawed, and that it would be better to move on to something else where it's just not considered capitalism. It's not the type of relationships that we have with one another through the political economy, and that our relationships just look very different. And so I think there's an argument to say that is center left, but generally sometimes you have, especially in American discourse, people think that the Democrats are the left or whatever. And that's kind of like even in Europe, it's kind of like a very ridiculous thing to think. If you just look at their policies and the way that they govern, it's like very, very silly to think that. But it's sort of like, if you think of the Republicans as the right, then de facto the others must be the left, when in reality, if you like take a closer look, they're both kind of right-wing parties in any other country. And, I think since you're based in the UK as well, I mean, like the Labour Party is filled with people who are centrists, who are like not on the left, who do not agree with a critique of capitalism, who believe that capitalism is like the best type of system we should have. And, we just need to kind of reform it in minor ways here and there in order to make it better for more people. So, there's kind of like this, let's say uneducated, or like, I don't want to be rude, but kind of say like kind of idiot understanding of what left is, that gets pushed a lot by people who are not on the left. And then there's like a real kind of general, more like debatable and more realistic definition of the left. Don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does absolutely. And I kind of resonate with that because I, for a long time, have identified as an anarchist or a voluntarist. And that would be considered extreme left, right? And And
depends.
obviously,
so sometimes it's hard
yeah,
with like these like spectrums. It's like it's an oversimplification that is sometimes useful to like use this spectrum of like more or less left. But sometimes I don't find it very helpful especially when you're beginning to debate like very specific points about things. Then it becomes like kind of unimportant to say like whether someone else is more left or not. Then it becomes kind of like it sometimes turns into like a gatekeeping thing, like if you look at it historically. But there are different ideas on like how to reach like maximum human freedom, and people just have different ideas about that, and that could there are different labels for how you kind of define that. But
yeah, I know, I absolutely agree. I think my point was that I don't necessarily identify with the left, even though that's kind of the box that I might be put into when we're talking about the sort of mainstream or general idea, like you talked about, of this idea of the left. If I said I'm an anarchist,
right.
they go, "Oh, you're a communist," straight away, like you're a commie, But then if you're actually like in these communities and you're on the forums and you're involved in debates and things, and you realize like actually there's like a really like hard divide between like the anarcho-capitalists and the anarcho-communists. There's a massive war going on constantly, and it's not like clear cut. Like people that the ANCAPs would say would sort of denounce that kind of labeling of being, oh, you're an extreme lefty sort of thing. But I just put like I say, personally, I identify as an anarchist, but I'm open to solutions from both sides. So I don't consider myself left. I'm just aware of like the perception of that. And I think you made a really good point about how there is a lot of nuance to these positions, and it's not so useful to argue about these the labels themselves. And maybe they weigh you down in some way.